Wanted to, first of all, again, thanks for you registering and attending today's webinar on how to protect your Office 365 and G Suite data. As we are all migrating, or many of us migrating to the cloud and using cloud applications for our critical business communications and email. I mean, if it was down, what would you do? But we're also using it for file shares. We're using it for online discussions, you name it. It's really being used for kind of a little bit of everything. That said, who's backing up that data? One of the really open secrets in this industry is that data that Microsoft or Google has, they're not backing it up. And so what happens is accidental deletion, encryption, ransomware attacks are compromising 365 and G Suite. So today what we're going to talk about is how to make sure that your 365 or G Suite data is protected from accidental deletion, accidentally being overwritten, or heaven forbid, a ransomware or other criminal attack. So we've got Dominic sharing his screen. Hopefully everybody can see that okay. I see it fine. And we're going to monitor chat and questions throughout so we can keep it interactive. We will record this and post it on YouTube. With that, Dominic, take it away.
Thank you very much. And hopefully everybody can hear me now and you can see my screen. And what we'll kind of go through today is an understanding of cloud backup and is your data, protected in some of these environments that we've all started working in a little bit more over the past, I'd say last 4 or 5 years, and even more so over the last, last 2 or 3 months. So what we'll do today is we'll kind of go through a little bit of, like I said, a presentation here. But before we do that, I do want to kind of call to attention the partner that we're on here with. And I would imagine, again, everybody here, this is kind of the commonality or the relation that we all have together. But just want to kind of highlight Vertex here and, just make sure that you understand that if there is any, need in terms of getting in touch with them, they do have access through their website. They do have their phone number listed here. So throughout this presentation, if there's anything that comes up that, maybe you haven't talked to them about, or maybe this is your first time engaging, like please reach out and follow up on any information more through any of these means here. So with that said, I just want to briefly introduce myself. My name is Dominic Straggler. I work over at Datto Corporation, and I'm on the call today as a vendor speaker because what I do is I specialize on our cloud backup product. I oversee our product over there, and I work heavily or intensively in understanding Office 365, G Suite, and how we as a provider can back those areas up. So again, happy to be on this call as maybe more or less like an industry expert or knowledge base to help kind of provide some of that information and understanding to the broader group here. So to kick our conversation off, I really do find this slide pretty funny, and I say that only to take us on a brief story because I've worked for Datto now for the greater part of 9 years, but the SaaS protection product, the cloud backup product, is something new for me over the last couple of years. So I've personally been able to see this industry kind of grow and expand. And more importantly, I've seen kind of the shift from the on-premise mail servers that I'm sure a lot of people can remember, right? It's not that far out of our minds, to this new standard of the cloud. And what I mean is, like, this isn't even at a service provider or at a IT level. Just talking simply to business owners, I hear a huge difference in terms of how mail and office is run out of their company. And in terms of, like I said, gone are the days of we have a mail file server and we have Microsoft booted up on every single desktop. We have the startup disks, all the stuff that we used to remember from that more manual time period, that more on-premise time period that we come from. Now I hear those same business owners talking about Office 365, cloud applications, and what's funny is moving to the cloud, just to kind of echo this slide, moving to the cloud really doesn't seem to be an option anymore. It really seems more or less to be the standard. And again, I know there's outlier cases out there. So if you're in, a specific industry or regulated industry where you can raise your hand and say, I'm still one of those file server guys, they're still out there, or mail server guys, they're still out there. But this really has, like I said, more become the standard. And a lot of our conversation that we have today is based on that new standard, that new way of life that we have, that essentially we want to make sure that we understand where our responsibilities may still lie in that conversation. So the first, section or area that I kind of want to talk about is it's a survey that came from Aberdeen actually, in regards to, they went out and surveyed, small to mid-sized business owners, just in terms of asking about, what is your loss of data in these SaaS applications, and are you experiencing any? And I think, the numbers are a little surprising, but more importantly, the way the numbers break down are even more interesting. The reason I say that is because when you see a stat like this, naturally, just given the way our minds work now in this industry, is we think that this means that 1 in 3 companies are getting attacked, they're having ransomware, they're viruses, whatever we would think, but we usually bring our minds to the worst scenarios, the ones where people are maliciously trying to harm us. And while that's true, and while there are some that are definitely experiencing that, 13% of those people that are losing data are attributing them to hackers and ransomware. My point here is that this number is not overly large, right? This isn't the one that we're trying to raise this huge awareness for. Now, I will say, from a business owner perspective, if you were experiencing, something that could happen 13% of the time, it probably does cause, at least bring concern to the fact that, hey, maybe we should be stopping this area, or maybe this will grow in the future. So I don't think that we want to look past this stat. But when you take the malicious insiders and the deletions that come from them, and you combined it with the idea that 47% of data deletions are occurring right from end users. So again, I'm just going to flip back and forth between these stats real quick, but 7% being caused by malicious deletions from employees internally, and 47% being caused by accidental end user deletions. That's over 50% of the data loss that's occurring in these environments are just from people using the environment internally, most of which aren't even coming from a malicious or negative perspective, in the sense of they're just trying to work within the environment. There might be a mistake made. There might be someone, to use an example that we just had internally, we had a resource delete a whole team file from our team drive, thinking that it was just their viewpoint of the data. Now, naturally, we were able to recover it using our own internal tools, but we had the resource clear that out. They thought they were clearing out marketing content that was stale for them, but they were actually clearing out marketing content that was available to everyone. And if we didn't have a tool, the recycling bin was, the deletion was outside of our recycling bin capabilities. So we really would have been out of luck and not able to recover that data. So this is like one of those examples where I'm more calling to attention that, remember, we're talking about this new system, this new way that, business have standardized in terms of using cloud applications. And I think it's fairly plausible to think that not everyone that's using them within the business is an IT expert. This combination of sorts kind of leads to the statistics that you're seeing on the screen, and the idea that we don't need to be overly worried about people attacking our system or it being vulnerable to outsiders. Microsoft has a very secure product. They have a great platform that most businesses have made a great decision to kind of standardize on. And if you are using G Suite, that one's equally as good, just not as prominent in our space. But between those two companies, what I'm saying is you've chosen great companies to use and run your business on from an infrastructure standpoint. They're covering you on the front door, but it's things like this, that is more what we need to think about is, where's our responsibility when we're talking about losing our own data? When we're talking about, someone from the internal business maybe making a mistake and us having to have a solution to that, not just having Microsoft cover us from a defense perspective.
If I could interject 1 second there, Dominic, and I appreciate you sharing those stats, and you're absolutely right that we can't just focus on the 7% or the 13% when you got almost half of the data caused by accidental deletion or shooting yourself in the foot. I mean, who here on the call honestly hasn't accidentally deleted a file or overwritten, in a spreadsheet or a Word document and then yelped about it? I certainly have. But I do want to talk about this catastrophic protection as well on the ransomware side. Just to highlight this, last week I got a call from a large national nonprofit that's headquartered in Florida who was ransomware attacked. They were looking for help recovering. They found us from a Google search. He told me that they had 1,500 Office 365 accounts, all completely encrypted, including their OneDrive accounts. So it is definitely catastrophic for that to happen. this kind of solution will protect you from that. I know that that's not the primary focus because accidental deletion and internal deletion account for over half of the lost data, but this is really a low-cost, affordable protection from that catastrophic event. So don't lose sight of that.
Absolutely. And just to kind of even piggyback on the piggyback at this point, I don't want to overly stress one point and diminish the other one. When we talk through the ransomware examples and the ones that you just heard, I will admit that, we sit on phone calls all day from our side and listen to those exact ransomware scenarios. They're definitely like the ones that if you're in them, they're the most critical and the ones that need this functionality the most. What I would more advise is that you don't use either end of the conversation to build an excuse for why you wouldn't look at a cloud backup solution like this, right? A lot of times we'll use the I've never been hacked or ransomware excuse, and we're not thinking of the internal side, or we think like, hey, I'm a 2-person employee company and I don't have that many people to worry about training, so internal deletions will be low. And maybe you are someone that, at that point, wants to consider the ransomware side of things because maybe that really is more where the protection is needed. So I completely agree. And each organization needs to view their organization independently and understand what that knowledge gap might be. Maybe you are a wide-reaching organization with a lot of users in this. Maybe you're smaller, but you have a business that, is more, sensitive to a ransomware attack just because that data uptime is more important to you. So very good call out. And before we leave this section, I just want to make sure that everyone understands that these stats should all kind of work together, not against each other. So segueing kind of out of the data statistics, but still very much talking about them, I built this slide in fairly recently, as you guys can imagine, but it has now been, the past couple of months that we've been dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic across all regions. What I want to call to attention here is nothing, no scare play, no, anything that would derive from this in terms of, I guess the best way to put this is it only furthers our conversation, right? There's never been a time where cloud infrastructure and cloud, need has been more on demand. And by all of us, kind of doing this work from home or, different work setups in terms of, relying on this cloud software, what we've more seen is a greater need for the solutions, right? And what we're more calling to attention here is that there's a lot of businesses out there that just adopted Microsoft Teams, Microsoft OneDrive, maybe SharePoint for the first time during this pandemic. And the reason that we've kind of like brought this up and the call to attention is all of those statistics that we just reviewed are statistics that were situation. And what we're more saying is that, as we continue that conversation of education and adoption of cloud software, it's plausible to think that, a business might not have been thinking about cloud backup during this time period when they did adopt a bunch of new solutions and new ways of, processing or procedures within a business. So my I guess my only real informative point here is to make sure that, you do think about yourself as a business owner if you have seen your business adopting more cloud solutions, and maybe a decision you made a couple of years ago on not taking cloud backup because you were just doing mail or something at the time that seemed smaller, but now maybe that conversation has changed. Just think about that, and if the conversation needs to be reevaluated or reinvestigated. So again, I don't want to harp on this too much. I'm sure everyone's heard about it from all different avenues of vendors and IT and outside of IT, but it is something to think about and just how it could impact this conversation. So I think this was actually, the one that the slide that we probably wanted to shift to in terms of like that ransomware conversation. And I'm glad that we still have this in here to kind of talk about. But what this one does is, while we very much are looking at the current statistics prior, right? We looked at that Aberdeen study and we see that, a lot of the data loss that's occurring right now is coming from internal occurrences with some, ransomware and attacks sprinkled in. What this slide is more calling to attention is where we see things going over the next few years. It's not, again, to be, a real fear factor, a scare play, but it's more to think, again, from a logical perspective. We're all on these calls and we're on these webinars and Zooms learning about cloud solutions and cloud backups, and all these different businesses and vendors are working on ways of getting their systems into the cloud so that they can be accessible. Well, on the flip side, all the quote unquote bad guys and villains out there that have been, disrupting our businesses and trying to gain access to stuff like this, for the time that IT has existed, the same conversation is going to start to move to the cloud as well, right? We see that, infections are creeping up. It's plausible and it makes sense that as a lot of the business and a lot of the data shifts to the cloud, so will the idea of some of these attackers and some of these ways of getting into your environments and being intrusive. So again, when we're looking at current frame of reference versus future frame of reference, it very much builds the notion that, hey, listen, there's probably not a better time to prepare your business for this, rather than waiting for the webinar one day when we're saying, hey, ransomware attacks are up to 70 or 80% in the cloud, year over year, or something like that. This is a way that you can really arm and prepare your business, probably both from a philosophical standpoint and a budget perspective. So it's not a budget that's a surprise or something that's coming up when the first big cloud ransomware attack happens or something along those lines. Again, this isn't necessarily anything that we're trying to scare someone with, but we're just taking what we've seen as industry knowledge over the last 5 years and predicting what we think we'd see over the next 5 or 6.
Yeah, and if I could dovetail onto that, and again, I'm with you 100% on the no scare tactics, because that just doesn't help anybody. We're not here to be a negative news cycle or hype the negative side, but I do want to say this. It can be heartbreaking when someone comes to us and they didn't realize that their cloud data could even be ransomed. That's happened. But more deeply, a lot of us on this call are responsible for our disaster recovery and our business resilience planning. And part of that planning can be transferring risk to a cloud provider like Microsoft or Google, who really does have their act together on security. Even still, bad guys can get in there. So part of our DR plan and part of our resilience strategy can be a solution like this. And that's another element to think about. Not only are you solving a problem where you're protecting your data from accidental deletion, malicious insiders, or ransomware, but you're also solving a problem and you're enabling the business to have a greater resilience and also a better disaster recovery posture with a solution like this.
I think that's a perfect, segue. And again, I think they've been fairly natural, honestly, but it perfectly, aligns with the next part of this conversation, which is just where the ownership in terms of the data conversation, the continuity plan really resides, right? And this slide normally gets the most attention on these webinars, meaning I get asks about screenshots and just different pieces of it, because I really think this is a great visual interpretation of what we're dealing with regarding our responsibility in the data conversation. It also does a great job of highlighting that Google and Microsoft are still providing solutions and infrastructure during this, because a lot of times they get pushed on, Microsoft and Google are pretty reputable companies. Like, are they really experiencing all these attacks and hacks? And what I think what we're jointly saying on this call is, it doesn't need to be coming from the front door. It doesn't need to be coming through Microsoft's attack. It very much is the same stuff that we've dealt with in this space for, like I said, the last decade or so. User internal error, people coming in just through your side, phishing scams, things like that. Those are all things that Microsoft isn't watching. The back door, which is all of the customer accounts where you guys could, make a mistake or have an internal error that results in one of these attacks. Those are the areas where they're saying, hey, listen, that's still your responsibility, right? We're going to make sure that in these big overreaching scenarios, hardware failure, software failure, data availability, uptime, those are the things that Microsoft is saying right out of the gate, and Google, that we're going to provide, and we're going to make sure we have a reputable, service plan behind this so that you feel comfortable as a business owner using our solution. They're not saying that they're worrying about Jane Doe or John Smith and them downloading files and syncing them to your OneDrive and maybe bringing ransomware right into your environment, via the functionality. So what I'm more saying is, like, we very much want to separate those parts of the conversation in our mind, because this is a lot of times where I hear things like, we use Microsoft's backup, or we use the native backup. And a lot of times those are the things that we're trying to diffuse or explain in these conversations don't exist, right? The functionality might look like it does because, wait, Microsoft just got my data back, like my server burned down and they rolled everything back. But what they're using there is data replication. And without getting too technical with everyone, sometimes things can look like backup because the functionality, looks similar to what backup would be. But the mistake would be, assuming that there are backup components built into this or point in time recovery options built into it, when in actuality there's not. And even more, as we go into this presentation, you'll see that Microsoft and Google are actually calling to your attention, like, hey, we want to make sure you understand this isn't here. And if anything, we're telling you to go look at third-party applications to suffice this need. So again, this following the theme, this shouldn't be like shocking, and this definitely isn't us saying that Google and Microsoft are the bad guys here. They do a wonderful job covering their side. It's more making sure that you understand that there is a your side that you need to cover, and that Microsoft and Google are also trying to help you understand that as well. So again, like I said, we can elaborate on this, or this might be one that opens up a conversation where you do want to talk to, Vertex, or, something more about like what's going on and how you're covering these 5 or 6 items. But I do think that this is a great way of looking at it from a visual interpretation and understanding, okay, there is a split, and we do have some responsibility in this. I was referencing some of those SLAs, or some of those terms and conditions just a second ago as we were looking at that, and this is a perfect one, and it gives me the opportunity to talk about 2 things. So the first and foremost is that Microsoft does have these call to attentions right in their service level agreements, and there's certainly things, again, that you can sit down with your provider and review and make sure that you understand them. But there's also another point that I want to make specifically on this terms and conditions section. As we've gone through the conversation, we've talked a lot about, data availability, data needs, and kind of from the perspective and frame of reference of you want to make sure that you have your data because it's valuable to you, and you want to make sure that, you can have it in a situation where you lose it or it's been taken from you. The other part of the conversation is simply just, there's a lot of businesses out there that, while that still holds true, the compliances and data availability isn't just at the business level, but it's actually at the industry level. Right? Like there's a lot of businesses out there that have to meet certain compliances in order to meet, certain or keep certain certifications within the industries they work. These are HIPAA, FEMA regulations, all the ones that I'm sure we're used to hearing. And I'll stay on the most common ones for the point of this conversation. But in this case, looking at this language that's on your screen here, we can kind of like just look at it, in comparison to the HIPAA regulations, which is a 7-year retention of data. So, a lot of times, like, we're looking at this conversation from the idea of I'd like to have my data, or that this is a nice to have. But in certain industries where you're, regulated and supposed to be maintaining a level of compliance and a level of data, availability, this can really start to work against you. And what you're kind of seeing on the screen here is that Microsoft is saying that, hey, when you shut a user off in our system, we'll definitely keep that data around for a little bit, but we're not going to keep it around forever. You've chosen to shut that user off. So in these situations, Microsoft is calling to attention the period in which they'll retain the data for you once you've decided to let them know you don't want it anymore. And that's this 90-day period. What I'm more trying to raise the awareness on this call and show, through this example is, if you're not thinking about that 7-year compliance and how to, again, accommodate it, using a solution like this, you're just setting yourself up for the fact that, all of these users and resources that you offboard from your environment, you're purging the data out 91 days later, and you're very much breaking that compliance in terms of like how long that data retention exists. So I won't go too deep into this. It's definitely a conversation itself worth exploring if you do find yourself in a very regulated industry, or you think from seeing this you might be out of compliance. But what I would stress is to make sure that you are understanding that there is ways to accommodate and solve for this. But if we're not doing anything today, that we are just running on a 90-day compliance. And that might be something worth talking about in itself. So again, it's a two-part call here. One, to just make sure that we are aware that Microsoft has these service level agreements in place to kind of help us and make sure we understand, our areas, but also to think about this from a compliance perspective too, and maybe not just a like to have or a need for data, in terms of the business. So I personally put this slide up here because a lot of times it's mistaken as the Goldilocks slide, right? The do nothing, do something, do everything. But I actually think that there's more of an understanding of the data points that are on here. I don't think it's that businesses decide that they don't want cloud backup, or that they look at it from just a budget perspective and make a decision. But I think that there truly is a lack of understanding in terms of the responsibilities and where data availability exists natively within the product. I think the people that have joined this call are the people that break that 40%, the people that have now gone and done an education and gotten an understanding of what cloud is and what cloud backup is. So what I personally do is I call to attention this 37% that you see here. And again, I applaud the fact that these types of meetings, these webinars, and working with service providers like Vertex is what breaks that and helps build this educational process in. This isn't just a product that people are looking to kind of, nickel and dime or, additive value. I've heard all sorts of things since being in the industry, additive, solution, fluff. But again, like while there very much are solutions that do accomplish those types of things, this product itself and this concept is a much more serious concept to make sure that you're taking seriously. And when it comes to data and it comes to your responsibility, it's being called right to your attention through these vendors that, hey, make sure that you're looking into this and make sure that you have a plan. So I think the first step of having that plan is a conversation in a webinar like this, but continue to kind of push this conversation and make sure that you and your business are protected, because this is becoming a very serious conversation, and it's becoming a more one that's getting more attention over the last 2 or 3 years as people are starting to realize, unfortunately through negative experiences, hey, there is ways that I can lose my data up here in the cloud. I didn't really realize that, but I'm starting to experience that I need to take this just as seriously as when it was a server in my server room. So rounding off our conversation and definitely leaving more than enough time for questions, which was the intention here. I kind of just want to leave you with the notion that companies do need an automated, simple, secure cloud backup, right? And as you can tell, like there hasn't been a whole lot of one product versus the other in this conversation, because the level of awareness is not around the specific product, it's around the industry need and more the need that derives from making a choice to move to the cloud as a business. So again, this isn't us pushing more than the education and the consultation, and then from there, working with a company like Vertex is going to give you a lot of, exposure in terms of how can I solve for this? What options do I have in taking control back on this? So I highly encourage you to continue these conversations. But again, I really want to make sure that we leave this with the point that, there is a lot of fluff out there, and fluff isn't bad. Fluff definitely changes the IT landscape and can sometimes like make life easier, and there's a lot of value to it. But I don't want this solution to get confused with that, or this service to get confused with it. And I want people to understand, that this, is probably something that more is business critical or business need than additive solution that, is a better way of doing something that you already have, available
Right.
to you.
Yeah, there's so much of that where everything's a me too, and this is a little bit better. It's a slight improvement. It's a great cup of coffee, but I'll add a flavor to it. No, this isn't that. This is something that you just don't have. Let me ask you, one question came in via email, actually, and to let all the attendees know, I'm monitoring questions in chat too, but somebody sent me an email and asked about Microsoft Teams and SharePoint, and their concern was that due to COVID, they'd kind of embraced Teams. They never had used it before, and they want to know, does this help in any way protect any of the data in Teams or in SharePoint online?
Absolutely. That's a great question. One that is great, I think, for the whole audience, if you weren't thinking about it in terms of the different services with built in to Office 365 and, how far does this conversation expand over them? The great news is from a simple answer, is it does accomplish backups across Teams and SharePoint, as well as OneDrive and Exchange. So a lot of the value that we're talking about here is extended to areas like Teams and SharePoint. So that, like I said, from just a direct answer is the great news part. But the other part within that email that I want to kind of call to everyone's attention is exactly the point that we talked about a little earlier, which is this new switch to Teams, or this conversion to Teams, and the fact that more data is kind of dropped into those areas than maybe just email before, right? Email was important, and there's certainly the communicative part of that. But Teams now calls maybe for a greater level of data that maybe wasn't necessarily in your environment before, or now making this environment more important. So it's a great place to bring your head, thinking of how you adopt these different services and making sure that you have backup, thought about for them as you move from service to service, is only going to help you, as you kind of grow the business and move more and more of it to the cloud.
Let me ask you this as well, Dominic. One of the questions I've got about SharePoint, so I've got a SharePoint, and I've got maybe a shared calendar, a shared PowerPoint out there. I've got multiple editors that, have legitimate reasons to go in and make updates. One of the ones we use here internally is we maintain our client reference list in a SharePoint area, and I've got multiple editors on it, me, Brittany, and a couple of other people. But accidentally, one of our guys actually deleted a couple of pages of data. My question is, hey, I want to roll back to a version from 2 days ago. Can I do that?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, great question, because this does give us, the opportunity to talk about, one concept a little bit more, and what I would call that is point in time recovery. A lot of times that is as what is misconstrued, in the Microsoft environment. And again, to answer the question directly and in the shortest way possible, yes, you can revert back to a point in time via our snapshot functionality so that you could recover from, prior to the incident or accident occurring. So instead of having to reconstruct and dig for that data, you're simply just using a very sleek calendar option to just go back to the point in time where you're like, nope, I'm sure it was still there from then. And you can recover the environment to exactly the state that it was at that point in time. This point in time recovery is what sometimes is mistaken within the Office 365 components, right? And the ability to have the option to go to a date and time and recover from that is very valuable to a business, both for this reasoning and others that I'm sure you guys can kind of bring your heads to and think about. This is the value of using a tool like this. So I really stress it. It's a great question, but the answer is really important to make sure that this is the functionality that you're gaining with a tool like this point in time ability, this ability to kind of migrate the calendar, to avoid and mitigate risks and disasters that occur. Absolutely something that can be done with our software.
I got one last question for you as well, and thanks for all this information. It's super helpful. But one of the questions I've got is that it seems like IT teams and IT folks have really been just inundated due to COVID and work from home requests and kind of all this shuffling around. I mean, the life of an IT guy during COVID-19 in the week number one, not only was it a global pandemic, but it was an IT response pandemic. I mean, it was all hands on deck. I got a call from a sheriff's office one day. I need 2,000 people working remote tomorrow. I'm like, okay, how do we do this? It's so my point is IT guys are just overwhelmed with all these responses they've got to have for remote workers and everything else. Let's say we're in a future state, we've got data SaaS protection. I'm protecting all my data in my Office 365 or G Suite, but I want to free up the IT guys from having to personally dig through this stuff and recover it for the user. Are there any capabilities or tools in this tech that allow the users to kind of help themselves a bit?
Yeah. So we do have some self-help tools, especially for the IT community. What I would stress is that the tool is an admin-only tool, meaning it's not going to extrapolate to the granular user level. So this isn't going to go all the way down to, John Smith in marketing or, Sally over in sales. But what it will do is it very much gives the IT provider and the IT landscape some ability to self-help and use this tool. So there is admin access that can be provided. Co-managed IT is becoming something that's much more prominent, both in our space and just in businesses in general. This tool very much allows for that, right? So you can still manage this while still having your IT or your MSP, involved in the conversation. But the self-help aspect makes it really easy to kind of help in a situation, just like you said, right? COVID strikes, a pandemic occurs, or let's pretend it's, in the future and some unforeseen disaster that we have. The idea that you have the ability to help yourself or within the business have access to this is super valuable and does, suffice that co-managed aspect that I think you're talking about here.
Yeah. So let me ask you one question on compliance. You touched on it earlier when you talked about HIPAA compliance, kind of tangentially with retention, going beyond the 90 days that is included in like Office 365 as an example, and retaining it for longer. If we do data SaaS protection in our Office 365 instance, does that mean that the end user has to have a business associate agreement with Datto so that HIPAA can know that we've got that BAA in place, or is the data still in the Microsoft cloud?
So it's a good question, and it depends on the perspective that you're looking at it from, in the sense of like there will always be, as long as we're looking at it from a copy perspective, you will still always have the data in the Microsoft cloud, right? We're backing up the data that we're pointing to. But as we kind of take this snapshot conversation, there could be data that one day you've deleted out of your Microsoft cloud or removed that now does exist in our environment. And in that case, we do have BAAs. We've signed them in different situations to suffice for those compliances, and we can work with you through that. The other thing that I would want to kind of call to attention is the customization of the retention period within our software. So again, I'm more specifically talking about data SaaS protection at this point, but by using the solution or service, you actually have the ability to set the retention period on your service. So, HIPAA is a great conversation with the 7 years. What I'm more calling to attention is sometimes you need to expire the data at a certain point in time. So just sitting here and saying, hey, we've got infinite retention doesn't necessarily help the problem. We actually have it to the point where you can set it to infinite, but you can also set it to a specific point in time to make sure that data is also expiring out of our environment to help comply with anything that you need on that side. So it very much, like I said, I want to answer the BAA side, but I also want to call to attention that you have customized retention settings in our product to make sure that you're also accommodating when data needs to be deleted.
Well, that's a great option. We've got a few clients on here that are in the government space, and I can tell you that cities and clerks and discovery requests are something we have to deal with all the time, and they're frequently asking us about that, sunsetting data. Not that they don't want to, give out all the information they can and be transparent and open to those that they serve, but it is a burden and a cost to maintain this data kind of forever and have to always disclose it and dig through it and present it back out again. So they do have, document management standards. So having that customization of how long to retain it before it sunsets or expires, I think is fantastic. Let me ask you this. Let's say I want to do this for my business, but I'm also worried that, gosh, do I want to sign some kind of long-term commitment and spend a ton of money and get roped into this? And now, Vertex and Datto own my data and I can never get it back, or I can never leave them, and they got me padlocked in. Can you address that and just talk about, how easy it is to both set up and to turn down, and where the ownership of the data really is?
Yep, absolutely. So you just to kind of, make sure that concern is mitigated right away. You still very much have access to all of this environment. And one of the great things is we've talked about restoring, right? Like restoring data back to an environment, and that being something that you can do with this product. The other thing that you can do with it is export the data out, right? So it's a situation where you don't necessarily need to feel like your data is being held hostage in any way. You're using our private cloud and a third-party cloud specifically with that intention. Meaning we're not using Amazon hosted web services. We're not using Azure. This is all privately built, infrastructure that we own. So by doing that, you're actually bringing it to a place that has much less of that, like, who actually owns this, conversation. It's just, an agreement between us, your provider, and you. And from a data access perspective, you and your provider have direct access to that data at any time. And if you do decide, in an unfortunate situation that, hey, you're moving on or you're parting from the service, you would still have export options and you'd still have access to that data. So whether it's restoring the data back into the environment before you leave, we've seen people do that, or exporting it out so that you have independent copies, you'll always have the ability to do something with your data before deciding what you do with our service.
Yeah, and that's important. I mean, Datto has always been such a great partner for Vertex and for all of our clients as well, and such a great corporate culture. Not that this relates to ransomware or any of these other things, but hurricane season is coming up. That's one of the benefits of 365 and G Suite is your data is kind of off premise and it's not as vulnerable to hurricanes, which in Florida is a major issue. But I do want to highlight this one kind of good news story. Several years back when we had hurricanes blow through that just devastated Florida, Datto, at no charge and no cost to any customers, sent down teams of IT people, trucks full of equipment, and really helped in that hurricane recovery effort, helped businesses get back online, loaned them switches, got them on mobile hotspots, did kind of everything they could to help businesses and communities respond, never charged anyone a dime for any of it. And I think that just highlights the corporate culture of Datto and how they really are not just in it to make money. I mean, we all need to get paid, but Datto is really a great corporate citizen and a great partner, not only to Vertex, but all to our clients. One last thing I want to talk about on the product side, because I think this is important, is kind of a cool little, more of a geekier thing is when somebody leaves the organization, you have somebody that's a VP of finance or whatever, you've got 365, that person departs. There's always seems to be this kind of struggle with what do we do with his or her email? How do we handle that? And what I see frequently is a lot of times people will just basically change a password on the account, have somebody else monitor the mailbox, and if it's a senior leadership type person, they'll just leave that 365 account active kind of forever. And so we'll go in to 365 scenarios and look at people's data, and they'll have 15, 20, 30 accounts they're paying for employees who aren't even there anymore because they don't want to lose that email. They didn't export it. It's too much junk. They want searchability. There's all kinds of reasons. But I love the fact that the Datto SaaS protection actually has kind of a solution for both transferability, and also for handling departed clients' storage. What can you say about that, Dominic?
Yeah, so I absolutely, in terms of like, there's a lot of really good pieces in that conversation, right? One, in terms of being able to kind of archive this data and not necessarily have to, leave those users on is a big piece, right? So I want to start there because I think there's just a really valuable conversation to understand there, which is if you are a business that are choosing to leave those resources on, this product is going to be an immense cost savings to you. And I know that's crazy to talk about adding a new product and getting cost savings, but if you're leaving licenses on in Office 365 and paying for them to meet data compliance, there are much, much cheaper options. And not even like cheaper options as in like cheaper cloud backup options. I'm saying cheaper options than paying for a service that you're not using to maintain data. So if anyone is out there doing that, and trust me, every one of these calls that I'm on, there's at least 2 or 3 people, and it's not a bad thing. You're doing it to meet compliances and data needs. Definitely reach out to Vertex and talk to them about this, because it's not going to be a service that's going to be an extra cost to the business. I'm sure there actually will just be cost savings to the business. So it's a great conversation to bring up and a great point to raise. The other point that was built into that was this idea of transferring data over, and when someone leaves, what do we do with their mailbox, and how that data passes across. And I'll use again like a real example that we're going through. We have a resource that recently left our side. Their mailbox was consolidated into someone else's mailbox, was consolidated into someone else's mailbox, and the resource now had gotten so many emails into their inbox from all of this like consolidation that they weren't able to get more emails into their inbox, and their attachment files were piling up. So it can really add up fast if you're just trying to basically dump emails or merge accounts into accounts. And by using our tool, you actually have the ability to pass on someone's inbox just as a folder, right? So instead of making their inbox your inbox, or combining accounts or having multiple accounts you need to log into and manage, when someone leaves the business, you can simply move their information into someone else's environment with a nice folder categorization of, hey, this is their inbox. Like if you want to navigate it, you can go through their version. It won't drift into yours. You can pull data out of it and bring it to your environment if you want to keep it, but it keeps it nice and separate. So this is a great way where if you're a manager and you have an employee leave, you still want access to that inbox for on-demand information, but maybe you don't want it in your information. Maybe you don't want it to mess up your organization or your folder structure or your inbox that you're kind of keeping managed. So it's something to think about, but it's definitely something our solution helps with. And from a restore perspective, we always keep things nice and neat so that you can kind of monitor and organize them from like I said, a perspective where it's not necessarily becoming your live environment.
Awesome. Let me ask you this last one, and we'll wrap up the webinar. Remember, you can still submit your questions in chat. It's not too late. But to kind of conclude here, let's say I'm interested in this. I want to move forward. What are you seeing as the most common, evaluation process? Are you seeing people next go into maybe a webinar demo to see what the interface looks like, or are you mostly seeing people say, you know what, this seems so easy, just give me a price and let's do it? What are the most common ways that people typically proceed when they want to learn more?
Yeah, so it does depend on how much ownership you're going to have in the tool itself, meaning if we're doing co-managed, like there might be a need for seeing the tool. To be completely honest, I have worked like across different tools and services and products in the tech space in my career, and I will tell you right now, this product is the lightest, easiest solution that I've ever worked with, in the backup space, period. Right? It's a simple setup process. It's an API pull, and once it's set up, the data is flowing back and forth very seamlessly. Because of that, if you're not someone that is managing the solution or managing the tech, you really don't even need a demonstration as much as you need an understanding of what you're getting from it. And that's something that Vertex can help with, tremendously, in terms of saying, okay, you're going to get this many daily backups, this much, information is going to be stored here. And, those details might be important, but from a technical demo, you might not even need that level of dive. So again, I challenge the people on the call to kind of understand where they are, in terms of that alignment, right? Are you someone that's more on the tech side and plan on using this tool? If not, it's simply getting the service started for your business. Once you put the check in the box, it really is like just that, like have it running behind the scenes. And it's I hate using the word, but it's an insurance policy. It's there to make sure that like when things happen, you have the ability to recall from them. It's not something that you need to be overwhelmed with or feel that you need to be incredibly hands-on with. And for that reason, it helps, right? It's lightweight, it's easy. And hopefully that itself kind of builds some value into the people that are on the call listening to this.
Fantastic. Listen, I want to just say thank you again to everyone on the call. I want to thank Dominic for the presentation. Obviously, a master of this subject, knows everything there is to know about SaaS protection. I also want to just say thanks again for explaining the need for this. This is not you want fries with that, with your McDonald's meal, you know. This is a necessity. And I don't want to, I wish I could wave a wand like Harry Potter and then just deliver this to everybody so I don't get another call from somebody. When I got a call from this nonprofit that's headquartered in Tampa that serves those that are really in a tough spot in their life, and I found out that thousands of users' accounts have been encrypted in a ransomware attack, and the OneDrives are lost, and they had to rebuild from scratch because they couldn't afford the ransom. It's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. And so we do want to promulgate this information and get it out there and let people know there is a solution. My promise to you from Vertex, if you do want to go down this road, I'll tell you, it's super easy to set up. Dominic is right. It's super simple. We can just do it all for you and manage it for you. You can co-manage it and get in there yourself. It works like a charm. We get 100% guarantee it, and it's low cost and affordable. So for all those reasons, you know, your next step would be get with me or your account manager or any of us. Let us know what you prefer to do. We can show you the tool. We can just give you pricing. We could just set it up for you and you can engage. It's really your choice. But whatever you do, make sure that you're protecting that cloud data because you don't want to be in the position where you've either got accidental deletion, a malicious insider, or heaven forbid, one of these, you know, catastrophic ransomware type events. So thanks everybody for joining. I hope you all have a great rest of your week and a good long weekend.